Everything feels heavier when emotions are in control. Thoughts accelerate, reactions fire instantly, and progress slows without warning. Energy leaks through unnecessary conflict, rushed decisions, and words released too early. This is not a motivation problem. This is not a talent problem. This is an emotional control problem. Life is not defeating you through force. It is defeating you through reaction. Every emotional reaction surrenders leverage. Every rushed response gives away position. Loss rarely comes from lack of effort. It comes from poor timing. Feeling tired does not excuse impulsive behavior. Feeling behind does not justify emotional decisions. Weak moments are not permission to lose control. Emotions were never designed to lead. They were meant to signal, not command. When signals become orders, discipline collapses. Reacting feels natural, but natural is not effective. Reacting feels honest, but honesty without restraint creates damage. Reacting feels relieving, but relief often destroys momentum. Winning more has nothing to do with intensity. Winning more comes from restraint under pressure. Pressure reveals who reacts and who controls. Most people lose before opportunity even arrives. They speak too soon, decide too early, commit too emotionally. By the time clarity appears, position is already gone. Control is not suppression. Control is delayed response, guided by intention. Delay creates space, and space creates advantage. This is not about feeling calm. This is about remaining functional when calm is unavailable. Control that works only when comfortable is not control. If this confrontation feels personal, it is meant to. If resistance is rising, it is already working. If you are the person this book is talking to, then your transformation journey has just begun. Chapter 1. Emotional control is power. Emotional control is not restraint. It is authority, exercised consistently under internal pressure. Every outcome experienced today reflects how emotions were handled yesterday, not circumstances alone. Power begins internally, long before it appears in results, behavior, or visible success. Reactivity feels immediate and justified, but it quietly erodes long-term positioning and self-respect. Each emotional outburst, retreat, or impulsive decision transfers power away from deliberate intent. Nothing external steals momentum faster than internally unmanaged emotional reactions. Emotions arrive automatically, but obedience to them is always a choice. That distinction determines whether life feels reactive or directed over extended periods. Control is not about eliminating emotion. It is about interrupting its demand for immediate action. Reacting less creates space, and space restores choice under pressure. That pause becomes the difference between repeating patterns and altering trajectories permanently. Winning more begins the moment emotions stop making decisions on your behalf. Most failures are not skill failures. They are emotional management failures disguised as circumstances. Anger distorts judgment, fear compresses vision, and frustration accelerates poor decision-making. Without control, emotions become unreliable advisors pretending to be urgent truths. Internal discipline is built when reactions are delayed long enough to regain perspective. That delay weakens emotional intensity while strengthening rational command and strategic clarity. Control grows through repetition, not insight, and must be practiced during discomfort deliberately. Feeling pressure does not require emotional discharge. It requires internal containment and direction. Containing emotion does not weaken it. Containment refines it into usable energy. Raw emotion is chaotic, but disciplined emotion becomes fuel for consistent action. Reacting less does not mean disengaging. It means choosing engagement deliberately and precisely. Every moment of restraint compounds authority, even when results are not immediately visible. The nervous system learns obedience when emotional impulses are consistently overridden. Control must be exercised, especially when emotions argue for urgency or relief. Those moments define whether authority is internal or surrendered temporarily. Each time reaction is delayed, the mind strengthens its capacity to lead future moments. Winning more does not require constant effort. It requires consistent emotional governance. That governance becomes identity through repetition, not intention. Control practiced during weakness builds resilience that remains available during pressure. Emotional mastery is not achieved once. It is enforced daily without negotiation. Authority erodes quickly when emotional indulgence is tolerated, even occasionally. Consistency matters more than intensity when building unshakable internal control. The goal is not emotional comfort. The goal is emotional command. Comfort seeks relief. Command seeks effectiveness regardless of internal turbulence. Control means acting correctly even when emotions demand retreat, reaction, or avoidance. Power grows quietly as reactions diminish and deliberate responses become automatic. That quiet power reshapes behavior, decisions, and long-term positioning without dramatic effort. Momentum shifts when emotional authority returns to conscious control consistently. This chapter establishes one principle that cannot be negotiated or softened. Emotional control is not optional if winning more is the objective. Chapter 2. Reaction is the enemy. Reaction feels justified because it arrives fast, loud, and emotionally convincing in the moment. That speed creates the illusion of truth, urgency, and necessity where none actually exists. Most damage is not caused by external pressure, but by unfiltered internal response to pressure. Every reaction shortens the distance between emotion and action, removing conscious authority entirely. When reaction leads, choice disappears, and behavior becomes predictable, impulsive, and exploitable. Life becomes a sequence of responses instead of a series of deliberate decisions. Reaction promises relief, but it always collects payment later through regret, stagnation, or lost positioning. That payment accumulates quietly, eventually appearing as frustration, self-doubt, and chronic dissatisfaction. Nothing drains confidence faster than repeatedly acting against long-term interest due to emotional pressure. Anger demands release, fear demands escape, and frustration demands immediate resolution. None of those demands are aligned with winning, building, or progressing consistently over time. Reaction serves the emotion, not the outcome, and never considers consequences beyond the present moment. Reacting less is not weakness. It is refusal to surrender authority to unstable internal signals. Strength is not expressed through immediate expression. Strength is expressed through controlled delay. Delay breaks the emotional spell that convinces reaction it must happen now. Every emotion peaks and falls if denied immediate obedience. That biological reality becomes leverage when reaction is postponed intentionally. The longer reaction is delayed, the weaker its influence becomes on decision-making. Reaction thrives on urgency, speed, and emotional certainty. Control thrives on pause, distance, and deliberate evaluation. Winning requires choosing control even when reaction feels emotionally justified. Most people are not losing because of lack of effort or opportunity. They are losing because emotional reactions are sabotaging execution repeatedly. Execution collapses when emotions hijack attention, focus, and behavioral consistency. Reacting less creates emotional friction, and friction strengthens internal discipline. That friction trains the nervous system to tolerate discomfort without seeking immediate relief. Tolerance for discomfort separates those who progress from those who remain reactive and stagnant. Every time reaction is interrupted, internal leadership is reinforced. Leadership internally means emotions no longer dictate behavior automatically. That leadership becomes visible externally as composure, consistency, and reliability. Reaction narrows perception, compresses time, and exaggerates threat or opportunity. Under reaction sauce, long-term consequences disappear from awareness entirely. Control restores perspective by slowing perception and widening internal bandwidth. Emotional reactions are not evidence of authenticity or honesty. They are evidence of untrained emotional energy seeking immediate discharge. Authenticity without discipline produces instability, not respect or progress. Reacting less allows emotion to transform from noise into information. Information can be analyzed, redirected, and applied strategically. Noise only overwhelms and distorts decision-making capacity. The moment reaction is chosen, control is forfeited temporarily. That forfeiture may last seconds, hours, or years depending on consequences. Many lives drift permanently because too many critical moments were surrendered emotionally. Winning more requires recognizing reaction as the primary internal adversary. Not people, not circumstances, not timing, but unmanaged emotional impulse. Until reaction is confronted, effort will continue leaking through emotional cracks. Reaction disguises itself as honesty, passion, or intuition. In reality, it is undisciplined energy demanding expression without responsibility. Control strips reaction of authority and forces it to submit to direction. Reacting less is not silence. It is strategic containment. Containment preserves energy instead of wasting it on unproductive expression. Preserved energy becomes available for action that actually moves life forward. Each restrained reaction strengthens future restraint automatically. The nervous system adapts to delay and no longer panics under emotional pressure. That adaptation creates calm, not as a feeling, but as a functional state. Calm is not emotional absence. Calm is emotional obedience. Emotions still exist, but they no longer dictate timing or behavior. That distinction is where internal power begins to accumulate reliably. Most regret originates from moments where reaction felt unavoidable. Looking back always reveals reaction was optional, but discipline was missing. That pattern repeats until reaction is deliberately trained out of leadership. Reacting less is a skill built under stress, not during comfort. Comfort never demands discipline. Pressure exposes whether discipline exists. This work is not performed when things feel easy or aligned. Every reaction resisted strengthens identity as someone who commands emotion. Identity shifts when behavior consistently contradicts emotional impulse. That shift becomes irreversible when practiced repeatedly without exception. Reaction is the enemy because it steals choice, time, and leverage. Control restores all three and compounds their impact over time. Winning more begins when reaction stops being tolerated internally. This chapter establishes a boundary that must remain firm. Reaction is not to be negotiated with or indulged. Reaction is to be delayed, weakened, and replaced with deliberate control. Chapter 3. Pause before power. Power never appears in the moment. Emotion demands immediate action or expression. Power appears in the space created when reaction is interrupted deliberately and consistently. That pause is not hesitation. It is the doorway where control replaces impulse. The pause feels uncomfortable because emotions want movement, release, and resolution instantly. That discomfort is not danger. It is resistance dissolving under disciplined interruption. Every meaningful shift in behavior begins with tolerating that brief internal discomfort. Pausing creates distance between sensation and decision, restoring internal authority immediately. That distance weakens emotional intensity and strengthens rational evaluation simultaneously. Without that distance, emotion collapses choice into reflexive behavior repeatedly. The pause is short, but its impact compounds across decisions, days, and years. One paused reaction prevents unnecessary conflict, wasted energy, and long-term regret. Multiple pauses reshape identity into someone who chooses instead of reacts. Emotions exaggerate urgency to force immediate obedience and bypass conscious evaluation. Pausing exposes that exaggeration by allowing intensity to peak and decline naturally. Most emotions lose their persuasive power once denied instant compliance. The pause is not passive waiting. It is active containment under pressure. Containment prevents emotional leakage and preserves energy for deliberate action. Energy preserved through restraint becomes available for execution that produces results. Pausing before action restores access to long-term goals temporarily hidden by emotion. Under reaction, the present moment dominates awareness entirely. Under pause, perspective expands and consequences re-enter consideration. Power grows when emotions are experienced fully, but acted upon selectively. Suppressing emotion weakens awareness, but indulging emotion weakens discipline. Pausing balances awareness with authority without denial or indulgence. Every pause trains the nervous system to tolerate emotional charge without panic. That tolerance reduces emotional volatility over time through repeated exposure. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable through consistent containment. The pause becomes a habit only when practiced during moments of intensity. Practicing calm during calm conditions produces no usable discipline. Discipline is forged exclusively when emotions resist restraint aggressively. Pausing does not remove emotion. It repositions emotion as information. Information can be evaluated, redirected, or ignored depending on objectives. Information never deserves automatic obedience regardless of emotional intensity. Most regretful actions occurred because the pause was skipped entirely. Looking back always reveals there was space to choose differently. That space exists in every moment, whether acknowledged or not. The pause is the smallest unit of emotional mastery available. It requires no tools, no environment change, and no external permission. It is always accessible, even under extreme pressure or fatigue. Pausing reclaims time stolen by impulsive emotional urgency. Time regained allows thought to re-enter decision-making briefly. That brief re-entry often determines whether outcomes improve or deteriorate. Power is not expressed through speed when emotions are involved. Speed amplifies mistakes when driven by unexamined emotional energy. Controlled timing produces better outcomes even when slower initially. Pausing interrupts habitual emotional patterns reinforced over years. Habits weaken when their automatic execution is delayed repeatedly. Delay introduces friction, and friction dismantles unconscious behavior. The pause must be intentional, not accidental or situational. Waiting because circumstances block action is not discipline. Waiting because control is chosen deliberately is discipline. Pausing does not guarantee perfect decisions. It guarantees better decisions. Better decisions compound into better positioning over extended time frames. Winning more requires accepting incremental improvement, not instant perfection. The pause also protects focus from emotional distraction. Reaction scatters attention, while pause consolidates it inward briefly. That consolidation restores clarity before action resumes. Control strengthens when the pause is applied universally, not selectively. Allowing some emotions to bypass the pause weakens authority entirely. Consistency signals to the mind that discipline is non-negotiable. The pause exposes how often emotions attempt to lead unnecessarily. Not every emotion requires action, response, or expression. Many emotions exist only to be observed and released internally. Pausing converts emotional pressure into internal stability gradually. Stability is not calmness. It is reliability under emotional fluctuation. Reliable internal states produce reliable external behaviors. Power grows quietly as pauses accumulate unnoticed by others. That quiet growth eventually becomes visible through composure and results. External respect often follows internal restraint rather than emotional expression. Pausing is the first visible act of emotional leadership. Leadership begins internally before it can manifest externally. No one can lead consistently without leading emotions first. This chapter establishes the pause as mandatory, not optional. Without pause, control collapses into reaction repeatedly. With pause, power becomes available regardless of emotional intensity. Chapter 4, Command the Inner Storm. Emotions arrive like weather, but leadership determines whether they disrupt movement or fuel direction. Ignoring emotions creates pressure, but obeying emotions creates chaos that undermines consistency. Command exists in the middle, where emotions are acknowledged without surrendering authority. An inner storm feels overwhelming only when leadership retreats and impulse fills the vacuum. Storms do not require elimination. They require structure, boundaries, and disciplined containment. Without structure, emotional energy scatters and destabilizes focus repeatedly. Command begins with recognizing that emotion is energy, not instruction. Energy without direction produces noise, agitation, and wasted motion. Directed energy becomes drive, persistence, and controlled intensity over time. The inner storm intensifies when emotions believe they are responsible for decisions. Removing that responsibility weakens emotional urgency almost immediately. Urgency fades when emotions realize they will not be obeyed automatically. Command requires maintaining internal posture regardless of emotional turbulence. Posture is not physical. Posture is mental alignment toward long-term intent. That alignment anchors behavior even when emotions fluctuate violently. Emotional storms test leadership precisely because they feel personal and convincing. Every emotion presents itself as justified, urgent, and necessary. In the moment, command questions necessity without denying the emotional experience itself. Fear exaggerates risk, anger exaggerates injustice, and frustration exaggerates effort required. Those exaggerations distort judgment and compress future awareness dangerously. Command expands awareness beyond the emotional narrative dominating the moment. Maintaining command does not require suppressing emotion or acting emotionless. It requires refusing emotional demands for immediate behavioral expression. Expression without evaluation weakens authority and strengthens emotional dominance. The inner storm loses power when emotional language is replaced with operational language. Instead of labeling emotions as overwhelming, they are labeled as signals. Signals are processed, not obeyed, restoring clarity under pressure. Command also requires consistency across emotional states, not selective enforcement. Allowing certain emotions to lead undermines authority across all situations. Authority must remain constant even when emotions vary dramatically. Emotions attempt negotiation when command is first established. They argue timing, justification, and perceived necessity for reaction. Command does not negotiate. It delays, observes, and decides deliberately. The nervous system adapts to leadership when emotional expression is consistently contained. Containment reduces volatility by teaching emotions they are not in control. Over time, emotional intensity decreases because urgency no longer works. Command transforms emotional storms into internal pressure without behavioral disruption. Pressure can be used constructively when movement remains deliberate. Unmanaged pressure, however, seeks escape through reaction or avoidance. Holding command during emotional storms builds resilience that remains available later. Resilience is not toughness. It is stability under repeated emotional disturbance. Stability allows execution even when conditions feel internally hostile. Most people lose momentum not because storms are strong, but because leadership collapses. Collapsing leadership hands control to the loudest emotional signal immediately. Command restores hierarchy, placing intention above impulse consistently. The inner storm often demands certainty before action. Command acts based on principles, not emotional certainty. Certainty arrives later, but progress depends on action before certainty. Emotional storms tempt abandonment of standards temporarily. Lowering standards under pressure creates long-term self-distrust. Maintaining standards under pressure builds internal respect gradually. Command also involves choosing silence when expression would weaken position. Silence is not avoidance. It is strategic containment of emotional energy. Contained energy can later be redirected toward productive execution. The storm tests whether identity is reactive or disciplined. Identity solidifies through repeated behavior under emotional stress. Each storm survived without reaction reinforces disciplined identity. Command is not dramatic. It is quiet, firm, and persistent. There is no emotional relief initially, only internal steadiness. Relief comes later through results, stability, and regained confidence. The inner storm eventually learns limits through repeated containment. Limits create predictability, and predictability reduces emotional chaos. What was once turbulent becomes manageable through enforced boundaries. Command does not eliminate emotion. It reorganizes internal hierarchy. Emotions move from leadership roles into advisory positions. Advice can be accepted or rejected without conflict. Winning more requires command during storms, not after they pass. Control practiced only during calm conditions fails under pressure. This work exists for moments when emotions resist leadership strongly. The storm is not the enemy. Surrender is the enemy. Command turns storms into training grounds for discipline. Each storm endured strengthens capacity to win without reacting. Chapter 5. Delay is discipline. Delay is the deliberate refusal to satisfy emotional urgency immediately. That refusal is not hesitation. It is controlled resistance, exercised with intention. Every delayed reaction strengthens discipline and weakens emotional dominance simultaneously. Emotions demand speed because speed prevents evaluation and preserves control. Delay interrupts that strategy by forcing emotion to exist without action. Without action, emotional intensity often dissolves on its own. Discipline is not built through grand decisions made occasionally. Discipline is built through repeated small delays enforced consistently. Those small delays accumulate into significant behavioral authority over time. Delay exposes how often emotions exaggerate necessity. What feels urgent often becomes irrelevant after a brief pause. Delay reveals truth by allowing emotional distortion to fade naturally. Immediate reaction feels relieving because it discharges emotional pressure quickly. That relief is temporary and often followed by regret or weakened positioning. Delay preserves pressure long enough to convert it into useful energy. Discipline requires accepting short-term discomfort to avoid long-term consequences. Delay embodies that exchange in its simplest form. The discomfort of delay is the cost of long-term control. Every delayed reaction trains the nervous system to tolerate emotional tension. Tolerance expands capacity to operate under stress without breakdown. That capacity determines consistency when conditions become demanding. Delay also restores choice by reopening decision-making pathways. Without delay, behavior collapses into reflex automatically. With delay, multiple responses become available consciously. The mind resists delay initially because it disrupts habitual emotional patterns. Habits weaken when execution is postponed repeatedly. Postponement introduces friction that dismantles automatic behavior gradually. Delay must be intentional, not accidental or situational. External delays do not build discipline. Internal delays do. Choosing delay reinforces internal authority regardless of circumstances. Emotions often frame delay as avoidance or suppression. In reality, delay is preparation and strategic containment. Suppression denies awareness, while delay maintains awareness without obedience. Delay separates feeling from doing without denying either. Feeling continues, but doing is postponed until clarity returns. That separation preserves accuracy in action under pressure. Most errors occur because delay feels uncomfortable and unfamiliar. Unfamiliar discomfort is misinterpreted as danger or failure. Discipline reframes discomfort as evidence of growth. Delay also protects focus by preventing emotional hijacking. Reaction scatters attention toward expression rather than execution. Delay consolidates attention inward, restoring clarity before action. Choosing delay consistently reshapes identity over time. Identity shifts when behavior contradicts emotional impulse repeatedly. That shift becomes stable when delay becomes automatic. Delay transforms emotional energy into endurance instead of volatility. Endurance sustains effort when motivation fluctuates unpredictably. That endurance produces results independent of emotional states. Discipline without delay collapses under emotional pressure. Delay is the mechanism that enforces discipline practically. Without delay, discipline remains theoretical and unreliable. Delay also reduces unnecessary conflict and wasted effort. Many conflicts exist solely because reaction was immediate. Delay dissolves conflict by removing emotional fuel. Emotions lose leverage when they fail to produce immediate results. That loss of leverage weakens future emotional demands. Over time, emotions present themselves more calmly and informatively. Delay must be applied universally, not selectively. Allowing some emotions to bypass delay undermines authority completely. Consistency communicates that discipline applies regardless of intensity. The practice of delay does not eliminate emotion. It converts emotion from commander into subordinate input. That conversion is where internal power consolidates. Winning more requires patience under emotional pressure. Delay cultivates patience through repeated exposure to discomfort. Patience becomes strength when practiced deliberately. Delay feels like doing nothing, but it is active resistance. Resistance prevents emotional takeover and preserves long-term direction. That preservation compounds into stability, clarity, and controlled progress. Delay is discipline made visible in behavior. Every delayed reaction is a silent declaration of control. Control maintained consistently becomes the foundation for winning more. Chapter 6. Emotions are raw power. Emotions are not obstacles to progress. They are unrefined energy awaiting direction. Treating emotions as enemies weakens awareness and creates internal resistance unnecessarily. Treating emotions as leaders creates chaos, inconsistency, and repeated self-sabotage. Raw power without control is destructive, unpredictable, and exhausting over time. That same power, once disciplined, becomes fuel for focus, endurance, and decisive action. The difference is not intensity. The difference is direction enforced consistently. Every strong emotion carries usable energy embedded within its intensity. Anger contains force, fear contains alertness, and frustration contains pressure for change. Without command, that energy spills into reaction and impulsive behavior. Harnessing emotion begins with refusing to label it as good or bad. Labels distort perception and invite suppression or indulgence automatically. Neutral observation preserves access to the energy without surrendering control. Emotions amplify whatever direction they are given. When directed toward reaction, they amplify mistakes and instability. When directed toward discipline, they amplify execution and persistence. Raw emotional energy must be slowed before it can be shaped effectively. Speed prevents precision and increases the likelihood of misdirection. Delay allows energy to settle into a usable form. Fear sharpened through control becomes caution rather than paralysis. Anger refined through discipline becomes resolve rather than aggression. Frustration contained becomes persistence rather than abandonment. Most people waste emotional power by discharging it through expression. Expression feels satisfying, but leaves nothing available for execution. Harnessing requires containment long enough to convert emotion into action. Containment is not suppression. It is temporary storage under conscious authority. Stored emotional energy strengthens focus instead of fragmenting attention. Focus fueled by emotion becomes intensity without volatility. Emotions grow stronger when ignored and weaker when observed without obedience. Observation removes mystery while preserving awareness of internal signals. Awareness without reaction is the foundation of emotional mastery. Harnessing emotion also requires choosing direction deliberately. Direction must be aligned with long-term intent, not short-term relief. Relief consumes energy, while direction multiplies its effectiveness. Raw power becomes dangerous when released without a target. A clear target absorbs energy productively instead of causing collateral damage. Clarity determines whether emotional power builds or destroys momentum. Harnessed emotion increases capacity for sustained effort. Sustained effort outperforms bursts of motivation consistently over time. Consistency depends on controlled energy, not fluctuating emotional highs. Emotional power must be applied deliberately rather than expressed reflexively. Expression satisfies emotion. Application advances objectives. Winning requires application regardless of emotional preference. The body adapts when emotional energy is redirected instead of released. That adaptation increases tolerance for intensity without breakdown. Tolerance allows greater effort without emotional exhaustion. Harnessing emotion requires responsibility for its consequences. Responsibility replaces victimhood with authority immediately. Authority transforms emotional experiences into strategic resources. Emotions lose volatility when they are consistently repurposed. Volatility exists only when emotion expects obedience. Once obedience is removed, intensity decreases naturally. Raw emotional power strengthens identity when used constructively. Identity shifts when discipline directs energy repeatedly. That shift becomes permanent through consistent application. Harnessed emotion does not seek validation or release. It seeks execution, progress, and tangible results. Results reinforce control more reliably than emotional satisfaction. Many people fear their emotions because they lack control. Control removes fear by restoring predictability internally. Predictability stabilizes behavior regardless of emotional intensity. Emotional mastery does not eliminate feeling, it refines its use. Refinement converts chaos into controlled force. Controlled force produces steady advancement instead of erratic movement. Winning more requires access to emotional power without surrendering authority. That access exists only when emotions are harnessed deliberately. Raw power, directed consistently, becomes one of the greatest internal advantages available. Chapter 7. Stop feeding the fire. Emotions grow stronger when they receive attention, expression, and repeated internal dialogue. What is fed internally multiplies, regardless of whether it is productive or destructive. Feeding emotion without control turns manageable signals into consuming internal fires. Every reaction adds fuel to emotional intensity by validating its urgency. Validation convinces emotion that escalation is effective and necessary. Escalation becomes habitual when it consistently produces expression or relief. Internal dialogue often fuels emotion more than external circumstances ever could. Replaying thoughts intensifies feeling and extends its lifespan unnecessarily. Interrupting that dialogue weakens emotion faster than suppression or avoidance. Feeding the fire feels like processing, but it is often rehearsing reactivity. Processing leads to clarity, while rehearsing deepens emotional grooves. The difference lies in whether control or indulgence is present. Strong emotions do not require analysis during peak intensity. Analysis during intensity amplifies rather than resolves emotional charge. Resolution comes after containment, not during emotional escalation. Attention is currency, and emotions compete aggressively for it. Giving attention without authority strengthens emotional dominance. Withholding attention weakens emotion without denying its existence. Stopping the feed does not mean ignoring reality. It means refusing to amplify internal response beyond usefulness. Reality remains unchanged, whether emotion escalates or stabilizes. Emotions burn themselves out when denied reinforcement. Without repeated thought loops, intensity declines naturally. The nervous system recalibrates when stimulation decreases. Feeding the fire often masquerades as self-expression or honesty. Uncontrolled expression prioritizes emotional discharge over long-term positioning. Honesty without discipline destabilizes rather than strengthens authority. Stopping emotional feeding requires interrupting familiar mental habits. Habits weaken when attention is redirected deliberately. Redirection must occur repeatedly to become automatic. Emotional fires demand storytelling to stay alive. Stories assign blame, justification, and urgency to feeling. Removing narrative starves emotion of its sustaining structure. Silence internally is more powerful than explanation during emotional peaks. Explanation feeds justification, and justification feeds escalation. Silence deprives emotion of reinforcement without denial. Feeding emotion also drains energy needed for execution. Energy spent on internal conflict is unavailable for progress. Conservation of energy requires emotional restraint. Emotional fires distract focus and fragment attention. Fragmented attention reduces effectiveness even when effort is high. Stopping the feed consolidates attention back into usable capacity. The urge to feed emotion often feels necessary and righteous. That feeling is part of the fire's strategy for survival. Recognizing that strategy reduces its influence immediately. Stopping the feed does not mean emotions disappear instantly. It means they lose strength faster with each unreinforced cycle. Repeated non-feeding trains emotional restraint over time. Feeding emotion creates familiarity that feels comforting despite harm. Familiar emotional states become identity traps. Breaking those traps requires refusing to nourish them further. Control grows when attention is withdrawn from emotional escalation. Withdrawal is an act of leadership, not avoidance. Leadership decides what receives energy and what does not. Stopping the feed also reduces emotional reactivity to external triggers. Triggers lose power when internal response is limited deliberately. External influence diminishes as internal governance strengthens. Emotional fires burn brightest when emotions believe they are being heard. Removing that belief forces emotion to quiet down eventually. Quiet returns control to conscious choice. Discipline requires starving reactions consistently, not occasionally. Occasional indulgence resets emotional expectation for attention. Consistency communicates that emotional escalation no longer works. Stopping the feed feels uncomfortable because it removes emotional release. That discomfort is temporary and signals growth in restraint. Restraint creates stability that replaces emotional volatility gradually. Winning more requires controlling internal fuel sources deliberately. Uncontrolled fires consume energy without producing results. Control redirects energy toward actions that actually change outcomes. Chapter 8. Choose response, not reaction. Reaction happens automatically, but response is chosen deliberately under conscious control. That difference determines whether emotions lead behavior or serve intentional direction. Choosing response restores authority in moments where impulse previously dominated decisions. Reaction feels faster because it bypasses evaluation and satisfies emotional urgency. Response feels slower because it requires awareness, pause, and intentional selection. That slight delay is the price of control and the source of long-term advantage. Every moment presents two paths internally: immediate reaction or deliberate response. Reaction closes options, while response expands them through conscious consideration. Winning more requires consistently choosing the path that preserves options. Response begins with acknowledging emotion without granting it command. Acknowledgement prevents suppression, while refusal to obey preserves authority. That balance maintains awareness without sacrificing control. Choosing response requires clarity about long-term objectives. Without objectives, reaction feels justified and response feels unnecessary. Objectives anchor decisions when emotions attempt to redirect behavior impulsively. Response converts emotional information into strategic action. Strategy considers timing, consequence, and alignment with intent. Reaction considers only immediate emotional relief. The mind resists response because it demands effort during discomfort. Effort feels unnecessary when reaction promises instant resolution. Discipline accepts effort to avoid repeating costly patterns. Response is not indecision. It is disciplined selection. Selection requires evaluating multiple possibilities briefly. That evaluation protects against unnecessary damage caused by impulse. Choosing response strengthens internal trust gradually. Trust grows when actions align with values instead of emotional fluctuation. Internal trust stabilizes confidence regardless of external outcomes. Reaction fragments focus by pulling attention toward emotional expression. Response consolidates focus by directing energy toward execution. Execution benefits from clarity restored through response. Response also reduces regret by aligning behavior with long-term interest. Regret arises when reaction overrides better judgment. Consistent response minimizes internal conflict after decisions are made. Choosing response builds emotional maturity through repetition. Maturity is not age. It is control under emotional stress. Stress reveals whether response or reaction dominates behavior. Response does not eliminate emotional intensity instantly. It channels intensity into controlled action rather than expression. That channeling preserves momentum instead of wasting energy. The ability to respond improves with deliberate practice. Practice must occur during emotional pressure, not during calm. Pressure exposes whether response has been trained adequately. Response creates predictability in behavior, which builds reliability. Reliability strengthens positioning in personal and professional environments. People trust those who respond rather than react emotionally. Reaction invites unnecessary conflict by escalating situations prematurely. Response diffuses tension through measured and intentional engagement. Diffusion preserves leverage without sacrificing boundaries. Choosing response also increases resilience under repeated stress. Resilience grows when emotional disruption no longer dictates behavior. Behavior stability strengthens endurance over time. Response aligns action with identity intentionally chosen. Identity becomes disciplined when behavior consistently reflects control. That identity reinforces future response automatically. The gap between emotion and action is where response lives. Protecting that gap is essential for maintaining authority. Authority erodes quickly when the gap collapses repeatedly. Response requires humility to accept that emotion may be misleading. Humility weakens emotional certainty enough to allow evaluation. Evaluation restores accuracy before action occurs. Choosing response reduces emotional volatility across situations. Volatility exists when emotions expect immediate obedience. Removing that expectation stabilizes internal states gradually. Response is the operational expression of emotional mastery. Mastery is not theoretical. It is visible in behavior. Behavior reveals whether emotions are governed or indulged. Winning more depends on responding consistently under pressure. Pressure is inevitable, but reaction is optional. Choosing response reclaims control regardless of emotional intensity. Chapter 9. Silence builds strength. Silence is not the absence of emotion. It is the containment of emotional energy. Containment preserves power instead of dissipating it through unnecessary expression. Strength accumulates when emotions are held, observed, and redirected deliberately. Immediate expression feels honest, but it often weakens position and clarity. Honesty without control transfers power away from long-term intent. Silence protects intent by preventing premature emotional discharge. Silence interrupts emotional escalation by removing reinforcement. Without expression, emotion loses momentum and intensity naturally. That reduction restores internal stability without confrontation. Strength is built when emotional energy is conserved rather than released. Released energy disappears. Conserved energy becomes available for action. Action fueled by conserved energy produces consistent progress. Silence creates internal space where evaluation becomes possible. Expression collapses space by forcing immediate externalization. Space restores perspective, temporarily hidden by emotional intensity. Silence does not require passivity or submission. It is an active choice to delay engagement until control is secured. Control precedes effective engagement in every scenario. Emotional silence confuses impulse because it expects response. Without response, impulse weakens and dissolves faster. Predictable non-response trains emotions to settle independently. Silence reduces unnecessary conflict by removing emotional fuel. Many conflicts exist only because emotions were expressed prematurely. With silence, situations often resolve without intervention. Strength grows when emotions are endured without expression. Endurance increases tolerance for internal discomfort. Tolerance stabilizes behavior during prolonged pressure. Silence protects focus from being scattered by emotional dialogue. Dialogue often amplifies emotion instead of resolving it. Silence interrupts that amplification cycle. Choosing silence also strengthens authority internally. Authority grows when behavior contradicts emotional demand. That contradiction reinforces leadership over impulse. Silence does not deny emotion. It delays its expression strategically. Delay weakens urgency and clarifies necessity. Clarified necessity determines whether action is required at all. Emotional silence prevents regret caused by impulsive expression. Regret follows when words or actions cannot be reversed. Silence preserves options that expression eliminates permanently. Strength is not loud, dramatic, or emotionally expressive. Strength is controlled, deliberate, and internally anchored. Silence reveals that strength without performance. Emotions test leadership by demanding acknowledgement through expression. Silence acknowledges internally without granting external obedience. That balance maintains awareness without surrendering control. Silence trains patience, which supports long-term consistency. Patience is not waiting. It is controlled endurance. Endurance outlasts motivation and emotional fluctuation. Choosing silence under pressure recalibrates emotional expectations. Emotions learn that escalation will not produce immediate output. That learning reduces future intensity automatically. Silence also increases perceptiveness by reducing internal noise. Noise distorts perception and narrows awareness. Quiet awareness improves decision accuracy. Strength built through silence becomes visible over time. Others sense stability without needing explanation. Stability earns respect without demanding attention. Silence is not withdrawal, it is preparation. Preparation ensures action aligns with long-term objectives. Action taken from preparation carries greater impact. Emotional expression often seeks validation. Silence removes dependence on validation for stability. Independence strengthens internal confidence. Silence also conserves energy needed for execution. Execution requires sustained focus and controlled effort. Energy wasted on expression reduces execution capacity. Strength grows incrementally as silence becomes habitual. Habitual silence under pressure transforms emotional volatility. Volatility, replaced by steadiness, produces reliable progress. Winning more requires resisting the urge to express everything. Expression satisfies emotion. Silence builds strength. Strength supports controlled action that changes outcomes. Chapter 10. Control attention first. Attention determines what grows internally and what weakens over time. Whatever holds attention repeatedly gains influence over emotion, thought, and behavior. Control over attention precedes control over emotion in every meaningful way. Emotions hijack attention by presenting urgency, threat, or perceived importance. Once attention is captured, emotion intensifies and demands behavioral compliance. Without attention control, emotional discipline collapses under pressure. Attention must be treated as a limited resource, not an unlimited capacity. Every moment attention is wasted on reaction. It is unavailable for execution. Execution requires sustained attention directed deliberately. Emotional reactions thrive when attention is scattered and unguarded. Scattered attention amplifies internal noise and weakens decision-making. Guarded attention stabilizes internal states and restores clarity. Control begins by deciding what deserves attention and what does not. Not every thought, feeling, or impulse qualifies for engagement. Qualification restores hierarchy within the mind. Attention follows intention when intention is reinforced consistently. Without intention, attention defaults to emotional salience. Salience favors intensity, not importance. Most people believe emotions control attention automatically. In reality, attention can be redirected deliberately with practice. Practice strengthens control even when emotions resist redirection. Redirecting attention away from emotion weakens its intensity. Emotion requires attention to maintain momentum and urgency. Without attention, emotion loses persuasive power quickly. Control of attention does not mean distraction or avoidance. It means choosing focus aligned with long-term objectives. Alignment anchors attention during emotional turbulence. Emotions often demand attention through repetitive thought loops. Those loops reinforce feeling by repetition rather than truth. Breaking loops starves emotion of reinforcement. Attention should be anchored to action rather than feeling. Action grounds awareness in reality instead of internal narrative. Grounding restores momentum even during emotional discomfort. Training attention requires consistency, not force. Force creates resistance, while consistency creates adaptation. Adaptation builds reliability under pressure. Attention control improves emotional resilience gradually. Resilience increases when emotions fail to dominate awareness. Dominance fades when attention is withdrawn repeatedly. Most internal suffering persists because attention remains fixed on emotion. Shifting attention reduces suffering without denying reality. Reality remains manageable when attention is regulated. Control over attention also improves decision quality. Clear attention evaluates options without emotional distortion. Distortion decreases as emotional noise fades. Attention should be directed toward what can be influenced. Emotion often fixates on what cannot be controlled. Redirection restores agency and reduces helplessness. Attention discipline must be enforced during emotional spikes. Calm conditions do not challenge attention sufficiently. Pressure reveals whether attention control exists. The mind learns quickly when attention redirection is consistent. Consistency signals that emotional capture will not be rewarded. Reward absence weakens emotional escalation over time. Attention control also conserves mental energy. Energy wasted on rumination drains capacity for execution. Conserved energy supports sustained effort. Emotions lose authority when they fail to monopolize attention. Authority shifts back to conscious choice and intention. That shift stabilizes behavior across situations. Control of attention supports emotional containment naturally. Containment becomes easier when attention is disciplined. Discipline reduces internal conflict. Winning more requires mastery over attention before emotion. Emotion follows attention, not the other way around. Direct attention correctly now, and emotional control strengthens automatically. Chapter 11. Discomfort is training. Discomfort is not a signal to retreat. It is the environment where discipline is built. Avoiding discomfort trains weakness, while enduring discomfort trains control. Emotional mastery develops only through repeated exposure to internal resistance. Every attempt to control emotion creates discomfort initially. That discomfort reflects habits being challenged and authority being reclaimed. Growth always produces tension before stability is established. Discomfort tests whether commitment exists beyond intention. Intentions disappear under pressure, but discipline endures. Endurance is developed by staying present despite internal resistance. Emotional discomfort arises when impulses are denied expression. That denial weakens emotional dominance gradually. Weakening dominance strengthens internal leadership. Training requires entering discomfort deliberately rather than waiting for it. Waiting allows emotion to dictate timing and intensity. Deliberate exposure builds tolerance faster and more reliably. Discomfort often masquerades as danger or failure. That interpretation is learned, not factual. Reframing discomfort as training changes behavioral response. Each moment of endured discomfort strengthens future tolerance. Tolerance expands capacity for control under increasing pressure. Capacity determines consistency across challenging situations. Discomfort also reveals attachment to emotional relief. Attachment weakens discipline by prioritizing comfort over progress. Letting go of relief strengthens resilience. Training through discomfort improves emotional regulation efficiency. What once required effort becomes automatic through repetition. Automatic control reduces cognitive load during stress. Discomfort builds confidence grounded in evidence rather than feeling. Evidence accumulates through endured resistance and maintained control. Confidence earned this way remains stable under pressure. Emotional growth cannot occur without friction. Friction reveals weakness and provides opportunity for strengthening. Avoiding friction preserves weakness indefinitely. Discomfort also sharpens awareness of internal processes. Awareness increases when automatic patterns are interrupted. Interruption exposes opportunities for deliberate choice. Training must occur when emotions resist leadership strongly. Mild discomfort produces minimal adaptation. Intensity accelerates growth when met with control. Discomfort teaches patience by removing immediate relief options. Patience supports long-term objectives by sustaining effort. Sustained effort outperforms bursts of motivation. Discomfort builds trust in the ability to endure internal pressure. Trust reduces fear of emotional states. Reduced fear stabilizes behavior across environments. Many abandon discipline because discomfort feels unfamiliar. Familiar discomfort becomes manageable through repetition. Manageability replaces avoidance gradually. Discomfort also reduces emotional volatility over time. Volatility decreases as tolerance increases. Stability emerges as emotional intensity becomes less disruptive. Training through discomfort transforms perception of challenge. Challenges become opportunities rather than threats. That shift improves engagement under pressure. Discomfort reveals where control is weakest. Weakness identified becomes focus for training. Training eliminates weakness through exposure and repetition. Avoiding discomfort delays progress indefinitely. Progress requires choosing difficulty over familiarity. That choice defines disciplined identity. Discomfort is not punishment. It is instruction. Instruction guides development towards stability and strength. Ignoring instruction prolongs instability. Training continues until discomfort no longer dictates behavior. Behavior guided by discipline replaces impulse. That replacement signals genuine emotional mastery. Winning more requires embracing discomfort consistently. Discomfort is the price of control. Control is the foundation of lasting progress. Chapter 12. Emotional neutrality wins. Emotional neutrality is not numbness. It is freedom from emotional distortion. Neutrality allows perception to remain accurate even when emotions are present. Accuracy determines whether decisions compound positively or deteriorate over time. Strong emotion narrows perception by exaggerating significance and urgency. Neutrality widens perception by restoring proportional evaluation. Proportion separates what matters from what merely feels intense. Winning does not require emotional highs or dramatic intensity. Winning requires consistency unaffected by emotional fluctuation. Neutrality stabilizes performance regardless of internal conditions. Emotional neutrality prevents overreaction to both success and failure. Overreaction destabilizes momentum by creating unnecessary oscillation. Stability preserves progress across unpredictable conditions. Neutrality allows emotions to exist without influencing behavior directly. Behavior guided by neutrality aligns with strategy rather than impulse. Strategy outperforms emotion-driven action consistently. Many confuse neutrality with indifference, but the two are not equal. Indifference disengages, while neutrality maintains controlled engagement. Engagement without emotional distortion maximizes effectiveness. Neutrality reduces internal noise that interferes with focus. Noise fragments attention and weakens execution. Reduced noise improves clarity under pressure. Emotional extremes consume energy rapidly and unpredictably. Neutrality conserves energy by minimizing internal turbulence. Conserved energy supports sustained effort and endurance. Neutrality enables quicker recovery after emotional spikes. Recovery speed determines how fast momentum resumes. Fast recovery preserves long-term positioning. Strong emotions demand validation through reaction or expression. Neutrality denies that demand by maintaining internal balance. Balance weakens emotional leverage over behavior. Neutrality also improves communication effectiveness. Emotionally charged communication distorts intent and escalates conflict. Neutral communication preserves boundaries and leverage. Winning requires operating effectively, even when emotions fluctuate wildly. Neutrality provides a stable platform for action. Action taken from stability carries greater precision. Neutrality sharpens judgment by removing emotional bias. Bias skews perception toward immediate gratification or avoidance. Removing bias improves long-term outcomes. Emotional neutrality must be practiced intentionally. It does not appear spontaneously during pressure. Practice conditions the nervous system toward balance. Neutrality strengthens resilience by reducing emotional dependency. Dependency creates vulnerability to external influence. Reduced dependency increases autonomy. Neutrality also protects identity from emotional contamination. Identity, anchored in discipline, resists temporary emotional states. That resistance stabilizes self-perception. Many setbacks escalate because emotions amplify meaning unnecessarily. Neutrality limits meaning inflation. Limited meaning reduces psychological load. Neutrality transforms emotion into background information rather than foreground command. Information informs. Command directs. Maintaining that hierarchy preserves control. Emotional neutrality improves adaptability. Adaptability depends on clear assessment rather than emotional fixation. Fixation delays adjustment. Neutrality does not remove passion. It refines its application. Refined passion supports execution rather than impulsivity. Execution produces measurable progress. Neutrality supports patience by eliminating urgency distortion. Urgency often creates rushed decisions. Removing urgency improves timing accuracy. Emotional neutrality reduces regret by aligning action with intent. Regret arises when emotion overrides judgment. Neutrality prevents that override. Training neutrality requires repeated refusal to amplify emotion. Amplification strengthens emotional dominance. Refusal weakens it gradually. Neutrality becomes automatic through consistent enforcement. Automatic neutrality stabilizes behavior without effort. Stability compounds into reliability and trust. Winning more requires operating from emotional neutrality consistently. Neutrality preserves clarity, energy, and control. Control determines outcomes when emotion would otherwise interfere. Chapter 13. Master emotional timing. Emotional timing determines whether energy is wasted or converted into effective action. The same emotion expressed at the wrong time weakens position and damages momentum. That emotion expressed at the right time strengthens execution and reinforces authority. Timing matters because emotions distort urgency and compress decision windows. What feels immediate is rarely important enough to demand instant response. Delaying engagement restores control over when action actually occurs. Mastery begins by separating emotional arrival from behavioral execution. Arrival is automatic, but execution must be scheduled deliberately. Scheduling action removes emotion from leadership entirely. Poor timing turns correct intentions into costly mistakes. Good timing turns moderate effort into disproportionate results. Winning more depends on choosing when to act, not just how. Emotions push for immediate release because delay weakens their leverage. Leverage exists only when obedience feels urgent. Removing urgency collapses emotional influence naturally. Timing creates strategic advantage by allowing context to change. Context often shifts when time passes, reducing emotional intensity. Reduced intensity improves accuracy in judgment. Mastering timing requires resisting emotional pressure to respond prematurely. Premature response satisfies feeling but weakens outcome. Outcome matters more than emotional relief. Emotions often confuse readiness with urgency. Urgency demands action now, while readiness demands preparation. Preparation improves execution regardless of emotional state. Timing also protects energy by preventing unnecessary engagement. Not every emotion deserves expression or action. Selective engagement conserves resources for what truly matters. Poor timing often escalates conflict unnecessarily. Waiting allows emotion on all sides to settle. Settled conditions produce cleaner resolutions. Timing mastery includes knowing when not to act. Non-action is sometimes the most disciplined response available. Restraint preserves leverage and optionality. Emotions lose power when action is decoupled from feeling. Decoupling teaches emotions that timing is not their decision. Authority returns to conscious choice gradually. Mastering timing strengthens patience without passivity. Patience waits deliberately, not helplessly. Deliberate waiting prepares conditions for effective action. Timing refines emotional power into precision. Precision multiplies impact while reducing collateral damage. Reduced damage preserves momentum over time. Acting too early often reveals insecurity or impulsiveness. Waiting communicates control and confidence implicitly. Confidence strengthens positioning without explanation. Timing also improves learning by allowing reflection before response. Reflection clarifies patterns hidden by emotional immediacy. Clarity improves future decision-making. Mastering emotional timing requires tolerating unresolved feelings temporarily. Unresolved does not mean ignored. It means delayed deliberately. Delay weakens emotional pressure progressively. Timing mastery reduces regret caused by impulsive action. Regret follows when action precedes evaluation. Evaluation improves accuracy and alignment with intent. Emotional discipline strengthens when timing is enforced consistently. Consistency trains internal expectation for delay. Expectation reduces emotional volatility naturally. Timing also increases influence by controlling engagement points. Influence grows when responses are measured and deliberate. Measured engagement commands respect quietly. Emotions often exaggerate the cost of waiting. Waiting rarely causes the damage emotion predicts. Acting prematurely often does. Mastering timing allows emotion to inform strategy instead of hijacking it. Information gathered during delay improves positioning. Positioning determines long-term outcomes. Timing mastery requires accepting temporary discomfort for long-term gain. Discomfort fades. Consequences remain. Choosing delay protects future stability. Winning more depends on acting at the right moment. The right moment is rarely when emotion demands it. Control over timing transforms emotional energy into strategic advantage. Chapter 14. Detach without disconnecting. Detachment is the ability to step back internally without abandoning responsibility or engagement. Disconnecting avoids discomfort, while detaching preserves clarity under emotional pressure. That distinction determines whether control strengthens or weakens over time. Detachment removes emotional fusion between identity and temporary internal states. When identity fuses with emotion, reaction feels personal and unavoidable. Separation restores choice by loosening that fusion deliberately. Detaching does not deny emotion or pretend it does not exist. It acknowledges emotion while refusing to let it define action. Action guided by detachment aligns with intent rather than impulse. Emotions intensify when they are interpreted as personal truths. Detachment reframes emotion as passing internal experience. That reframing weakens emotional authority immediately. Disconnecting abandons awareness and responsibility temporarily. Detachment maintains awareness while suspending emotional control. Awareness without obedience is the foundation of mastery. Detachment allows observation of emotional patterns objectively. Objectivity reveals repetition and predictability in emotional behavior. Predictability reduces fear and increases confidence in control. Strong emotions attempt to pull identity into reaction. Detachment resists that pull by maintaining internal distance. Distance preserves leadership even during intensity. Detaching reduces emotional fatigue by preventing over-identification. Fatigue increases when emotion is treated as identity. Separation conserves energy and stabilizes endurance. Detachment does not remove stakes or diminish care. It removes emotional distortion that exaggerates consequences. Clear stakes improve strategic decision-making. Most impulsive actions occur because emotion feels inseparable from self. Detachment restores the ability to choose response consciously. Choice returns power immediately. Detaching also reduces defensiveness during challenge or criticism. Defensiveness arises when identity feels threatened emotionally. Distance dissolves threat perception and restores composure. Detachment improves adaptability by loosening rigid emotional positions. Rigid positions limit response options. Flexibility expands possible actions. Disconnecting seeks relief by escaping engagement entirely. Detachment seeks effectiveness by maintaining controlled engagement. Effectiveness produces progress rather than temporary comfort. Detachment also improves focus by quieting emotional noise. Noise fragments attention and weakens execution. Reduced noise restores clarity under pressure. Maintaining detachment requires repeated practice during emotional peaks. Practice during calm conditions does not transfer reliably. Pressure reveals whether detachment exists. Detachment protects identity from momentary emotional failure. Failure interpreted emotionally erodes confidence unnecessarily. Distance allows learning without self-condemnation. Detaching prevents emotional spirals by interrupting escalation early. Spirals depend on emotional identification to continue. Breaking identification halts progression. Detachment strengthens resilience by reducing emotional dependency. Dependency increases vulnerability to external influence. Reduced dependency increases internal stability. Detaching allows emotion to pass without residue. Residue accumulates when emotions are suppressed or indulged. Clean processing preserves mental clarity. Detachment also enhances patience by loosening urgency. Urgency pressures premature action. Removing urgency improves timing accuracy. Detaching does not mean becoming cold or indifferent. It means remaining composed while fully present. Presence with composure defines disciplined engagement. Detachment builds authority that does not rely on emotional display. Authority grounded in control commands respect quietly. Quiet authority endures across environments. Winning more requires detachment under pressure, not withdrawal. Withdrawal forfeits opportunity and influence. Detachment preserves both while maintaining control. Detaching without disconnecting is a critical emotional skill. It allows participation without surrender. Surrender is replaced with deliberate command. Chapter 15. Resilience through restraint. Resilience is not built by emotional expression. It is built by controlled endurance. Endurance develops when restraint is applied repeatedly under internal pressure. Pressure reveals whether restraint exists beyond intention. Restraint is the ability to hold emotional energy without releasing it prematurely. Holding energy strengthens internal structure rather than weakening it. Structure supports stability during prolonged challenge. Resilience grows when emotions are experienced fully, but acted upon selectively. Selective action preserves long-term positioning despite temporary discomfort. Discomfort endured builds tolerance and confidence simultaneously. Restraint prevents emotional depletion caused by constant reaction. Reaction drains energy rapidly without producing durable progress. Energy preserved through restraint becomes available for sustained effort. Resilience requires the capacity to remain functional during emotional turbulence. Functionality depends on restraint, not emotional comfort. Comfort weakens capacity by avoiding necessary training. Restraint also sharpens awareness by slowing internal processes. Slowing allows perception to remain accurate under stress. Accuracy supports effective decision-making. Resilience built through restraint does not rely on motivation. Motivation fluctuates unpredictably and cannot be trusted. Restraint remains available regardless of emotional state. Holding back impulsive response strengthens neural pathways of control. Strengthened pathways reduce effort required for future restraint. Reduced effort increases consistency under pressure. Restraint feels restrictive initially because emotion resists limitation. That resistance fades as emotional expectations adjust. Adjustment stabilizes behavior across situations. Resilience is not emotional numbness. It is emotional reliability. Reliability means behavior remains aligned with intent despite fluctuation. That alignment defines disciplined identity. Restraint also protects focus by preventing emotional distraction. Distraction fragments effort and reduces effectiveness. Focused effort produces measurable results. Resilience through restraint improves recovery after setbacks. Setbacks lose impact when emotional escalation is limited. Limited escalation shortens recovery time. Restraint reduces emotional volatility by enforcing boundaries. Boundaries create predictability internally. Predictability increases confidence in self-control. Resilience requires accepting discomfort without seeking immediate relief. Relief undermines training by interrupting adaptation. Adaptation occurs only through sustained exposure. Restraint strengthens patience by delaying gratification. Delayed gratification supports long-term achievement. Immediate gratification undermines progress. Resilience also depends on maintaining standards during adversity. Lowering standards under pressure erodes self-trust. Maintaining standards builds internal respect. Restraint preserves optionality by preventing irreversible emotional actions. Actions taken in restraint keep future paths open. Open paths improve strategic positioning. Resilience built this way is quiet and durable. It does not rely on external validation or recognition. Durability ensures persistence through extended difficulty. Restraint transforms emotional energy into endurance. Endurance sustains effort. When motivation fades, sustained effort outlasts emotional fluctuation. Resilience through restraint strengthens identity as someone who endures. Endurance becomes expected rather than exceptional. Expectation stabilizes behavior automatically. Restraint must be practiced consistently, not selectively. Selective restraint weakens authority. Consistency enforces discipline across conditions. Resilience is not accidental. It is trained deliberately. Training occurs when restraint is chosen repeatedly. Repeated choice solidifies emotional mastery. Winning more requires resilience grounded in restraint. Restraint prevents collapse under pressure. That prevention sustains momentum when others falter. Chapter 16, Control. First, then you win. Winning more has never been about feeling confident at the right moment. Winning more has always been about reacting less when emotions demand immediate expression. Control comes first, or confidence becomes another emotional illusion. Emotional reactions create false confidence that collapses under resistance. Control creates quiet certainty that survives pressure, delay, and uncertainty. That certainty is the foundation of consistent winning. Reacting less means refusing to let emotion decide timing, direction, or intensity. When emotion decides, outcomes become unpredictable and unreliable. Unreliable behavior produces unreliable results. Control is not suppression. It is delayed expression guided by intention. Delayed expression prevents emotional energy from being wasted impulsively. Energy preserved becomes strategic leverage. Most losses are not caused by lack of ability or intelligence. Most losses are caused by emotional reactions happening too early. Early reactions sabotage positioning before opportunity fully develops. Control requires acting correctly even when confidence is absent. Confidence built without control is loud but unstable. Control without confidence still produces results. Results generated through control eventually create confidence naturally. Confidence generated emotionally requires constant reassurance. Reassurance becomes another emotional dependency. Reacting less means accepting uncertainty without emotional negotiation. Negotiation weakens authority and invites hesitation. Authority is established through consistent controlled action. Control protects you from emotional overcommitment to outcomes. Overcommitment magnifies disappointment and accelerates reaction. Reaction erodes discipline quickly. When you react less, you see more clearly. Clarity improves decision accuracy under pressure. Accuracy compounds results over time. Emotional confidence often disappears when resistance increases. Control becomes stronger when resistance increases. Resistance becomes training rather than threat. Reacting less allows you to observe emotion without obeying it. Observation separates feeling from action. Separation restores internal hierarchy. Emotion exists to provide information, not commands. Commands must come from intention and long-term direction. Direction determines whether progress compounds or collapses. Control before confidence feels uncomfortable initially. Discomfort signals that old reaction patterns are being challenged. Challenge produces adaptation when endured consistently. Reacting less prevents emotional escalation during setbacks. Escalation turns small losses into long-term damage. Containment preserves momentum. Momentum does not require enthusiasm. Momentum requires uninterrupted disciplined behavior. Discipline operates independently of emotion. Confidence built on control does not need external validation. Validation seeking exposes emotional vulnerability. Vulnerability invites distraction and manipulation. Reacting less reduces emotional noise that clouds judgment. Reduced noise increases awareness of subtle opportunities. Opportunity rewards patience and restraint. Control also prevents impulsive self-sabotage disguised as confidence. Impulsivity feels powerful but lacks endurance. Endurance determines who wins consistently. Reacting less protects focus during emotionally charged environments. Focus allows sustained effort while others exhaust themselves emotionally. Exhaustion removes competitors naturally. Control requires accepting temporary self-doubt without responding to it. Responding to doubt amplifies it. Ignoring doubt through action dissolves it. Confidence earned through controlled repetition becomes permanent. Permanent confidence does not fluctuate with mood or outcome. Stability increases performance reliability. Reacting less creates emotional distance from immediate gratification. Distance strengthens patience and strategic timing. Timing often determines victory more than effort. Control also improves recovery after emotional disruption. Recovery speed increases when reactions are limited. Limited reactions prevent identity damage. Identity, anchored in control, withstands volatility. Volatility exposes those who rely on emotional confidence. Exposure leads to collapse. Reacting less forces responsibility inward. Responsibility strengthens internal authority. Authority sustains action without emotional permission. Control becomes easier as reactions decrease. Reduced reactions conserve mental energy. Energy fuels consistency. Winning more is not about intensity. Winning more is about precision under emotional pressure. Precision requires restraint. Reacting less is not weakness. Reacting less is strength applied intelligently. Strength without control destroys itself. Control first transforms emotion from obstacle into tool. Emotion becomes fuel rather than interference. Fuel is only useful when directed deliberately. Confidence built after control does not announce itself. It operates silently through disciplined behavior. Silent execution outperforms emotional display. Reacting less rewires how pressure is interpreted. Pressure becomes neutral rather than threatening. Neutral pressure allows optimal response. Control before confidence is the path to winning more. React less and outcomes stop controlling you.